Welcome back. Well, as Europe continues to bear the brunt of Al-Qaeda-style attacks, there are growing demands across the continent to tighten anti-terror laws. Germany's interior minister caused an uproar last week. He proposed a host of new anti-terrorist measures, among them preventative detention, assassinating terrorist leaders abroad, and laws against using the internet to promote terrorism. Germany's current laws are very strict. Suspects can be detained for up to 6 months at a time with judicial approval. Across the border, France revised its anti-terror laws in the wake of the July the 7th bombings. These include controls on travel, particularly for countries at risk. Monitoring of telephone and internet communications, especially in cyber cafes, has been tightened. As well, prison terms for extremists have been increased, and it was made easier for investigators to access official documents. Well, joining us again are our guests, Tobias Fieken, an expert in Homeland Security from the Royal United Services Institute, Zaheer Hussain, a human rights lawyer and civil rights activist from the Stop Political Terror campaign, and Steve Park, a former Royal Protection Officer with the Metropolitan Police and a security and counter-terrorism expert. Mr. Park, if I can start with you, how can you convince those worried that another Jean-Charles de Benezes episode won't take place again with these harsher measures and the fear that's created?
I think that the Jean-Charles case was, de Menezes case it was incorrect. The police got it wrong. They just didn't get it right at the time. They got a wrong observation situation and they targeted the wrong person. I mean, you put your hands up and you say, yeah, we got it wrong. But in the case of international terrorism, as it stands at this moment in time, we know that we have a threat. We know that we've got cells in this country that are operating. We know that the Muslim community at this moment in time, although they are saying they're assisting the police, we don't have any evidence to suggest that they are actually bringing anybody in before these attacks are actually made. You know, as a rule of thumb, I'd like to see evidence, even if the police were suggestive that they were actually getting help from the Muslim community. I hate to say it, it looks like the police in this country are being absolutely slated for pointing the finger at the Muslim community at this moment in time. But we're looking at 1.5 million Muslims in this country. We've got 5 million Muslims in France alone. We're talking about 0.01% here. We're not talking about normal, decent people who don't get bought into this. Unfortunately, positive profiling is about getting the right person. And if you're looking for a bank robber in central London, you target the person who is committing the crime. And in this case, that's what positive profiling is all about, albeit it seems a little bit arrogant. But we've got to get on with the business of security and guarding our borders.
Mr. Hussain, Steve Park is pretty positive about positive profiling. However, I want to pose it to you. Are the bulk of the Muslim community both afraid of being bombed by acts of terror and also profiled by the police and maybe arrested?
Well, it's remarkable, actually. So we have a sort of former serving police officer who's talking about collective punishments, really. I mean, this is the interesting thing about it, where, you know, the whole debate has moved on so far right wing. It's unbelievable. I mean, how does he expect the 1.5 million Muslims in this country to take responsibility for 4 people who clearly, sort of, with the multi-million-pound budget security services have missed? And yet, if they miss, how does he expect the Muslim community to suddenly go under their beds and sort of pull out anybody who they think, well, hang on, he's talking about Iraq, he's talking about Palestine, therefore it's somebody who's going to be a suicide bomber. It's quite remarkable, actually, and I think this is a level and the shallowness of the debate that's been promoted by many people. I'm not surprised that the Metropolitan Police...
That's a complete misrepresentation of what I've just said.
A chance, if you want to respond to that, Steve Park.
Can I just finish my last sentence?
That is a complete misrepresentation of what I said, and I think the public that are listening can actually quite easily see that. I think the lawyer that's talking here is obviously dealing with people who feel that their human rights are being touched on a daily basis. I think there are a lot of people in the Muslim communities that certainly I meet that feel that they need to do something, they need to do more. I'm not pointing the finger at, and it's a complete misrepresentation as to what he's just said about what I said.
All right,
let's move away from that. I'll move away from that because I think there is a sort of collective punishment being meted out. But nevertheless, the Metropolitan Police themselves, who are used to dealing with in a cosmopolitan city with large number of people with different minorities and everything, have had the experience with the Afro-Caribbean community. They've had the experience with the Irish community. They've completely rejected the suggestions made by the senior police officer recently about extending the terrorism laws. Because if you ask any police officer, any senior police officer, which laws would have prevented 7th of July, they will say to you themselves, no laws would have prevented 7th of July. The reality is, when it comes down to this, it comes down to policing by consent. Policing by consent.
All right, Mr. Hussain, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because I want to bring Tobias Feakin into this with just a bit of a philosophical approach to this, looking at the laws themselves. If the current laws of prosecuting someone glorifying and causing incitement to terror were around maybe in 1987, public shows of support for Nelson Mandela and the ANC would have seen one thrown in jail for up to 7 years, because at that stage Mandela and the ANC were deemed as terrorists by the Thatcher government. Does that give an indication that the scope for interpretation is so vast?
I don't think, to be honest, the example that you're using there is wholly relevant right now. I think I want to return a little bit to what we were discussing earlier, and I think what's key within this debate is the fact that to create a more cohesive approach to terrorism within this country requires two things, which is firstly, I think, more of a national strength, a national in terms of creating more of a national feeling, if you like, in terms of everyone, more cohesion within our communities and nationwide. And from that will come aids to intelligence. The more people feel part of this country, the more likely they are to actually want to, root out potential wrongdoers within their communities themselves.
Mr. Park, is that possible?
I think that's
Park, is that
quite
possible?
key.
Yeah, I'd certainly totally agree with what your speaker is saying there. I mean, it's got to be a cohesive approach. We all accept that. Every chief constable in this country accepts that. However, we're talking about a very, very small percentage, a small, tiny minority, and we can only do positive profiling to eke them out of our system. We don't want them in this country. The human rights issues for them have got to be put aside, certainly on this count. But it has to be cohesive. It has to be working with the Muslim community. There is no other way.
All right, working with the Muslim community. Saghir Hussain, can there be some positive sides to this? Do you think that the police force, the government and the Muslim community can have a better relationship in the future?
Well, I think the government and certainly the police force need to show much more sincerity and sort of need to come up with much stronger intellectual arguments and evidence, rather than just going by with these sort of headlines and saying that Muslims are not doing enough and then it's a sort of Muslim this and Muslim that. Reality is, de Menezes was targeted because he looked like the North African Muslim, and that's why he was shot, held down 11 times in the head, and nobody was punished for that. We had a situation in Forest Gate where somebody was targeted on very, very, very weak evidence.
All right, so I'm sorry, gentlemen. I'm sorry, Mr. Hussain. We seem to have run out of time. We have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. And we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.